It is sometimes difficult for denizens of modern Western society to look back on the Middle Ages as anything other than just that, the middle. A necessary transition phase between the Roman might of late antiquity and the inevitable acceleration of the Enlightenment marching into modernity. The time between seems characterized by transition. Wars, migrations, and plagues that irreversibly changed the society of Western Europe. For us, looking back at the 1,000 years that happened before the last 500 reveals logical, large-scale rhythms and trends. The steady spread of Christianity, nationalism and literacy, the labor shortage caused by the plague, among other effects. Gunpowder eventually rendering knights and men-at-arms obsolete. It all seems to be priming the pumps for an increasingly literate and egalitarian society that will spend a couple centuries fighting over religion, and the next couple centuries fighting over politics and nationalism. This is one of the worst conundrums when it comes to trying to understand people from the past. We know how it all turns out, which makes it difficult to relate to those who had to live through times of great uncertainty. Thankfully, narrative art allows us to emotionally invest ourselves in situations like this and hopefully gain some empathy for what others, removed from us by intractable stretches of time, had to deal with. Even here, though, there seems to be an inordinate focus on things that will still matter in 100 years. Big battles and great deeds will always sell at the box office, but viewing history through that lens is like constructing an image of someone based on the things they've done that were cool enough to make it onto their Instagram. There's a lot of chaff that goes with that wheat. What about all the people who never had any adventures or did anything unexpected? Forget things that will matter in 100 years. What about things that matter now, like family and home and what we're eating for dinner? What was it like just to live back in the days before swords had decent hand protection? A lot of our video games follow some turbo badass around who has like 6 weapons and some magic and eats normal dudes for breakfast because his real job is to fight literal monsters and or gods. I'm definitely not condemning that formula because I have enjoyed at least 800 hours of it. But I love being able to interact with the same aesthetical and technological playground from the perspective of someone who is basically a civilian.
Is that mommy?
Hugo, come here.
What's happening?
Shh.
I know you're here, kid. I don't have time to play games. Where the fuck is he?
Stay down.
Hugo, it's me, Gabriel. Come here, quickly.
Hey, you! What the hell are you doing?
Let's go.
Huh?
Leave him alone.
Shut your mouth. He belongs to the Inquisition.
Oh no.
Leia!
I don't know anything.
There you go. That'll teach you.
No, I'm begging you. Hugo's not here.
And you, stay here.
Come on.
Very clear. Tell me, where is Hugo the Rune?
I'm pretty sure I was actually trembling this whole time. This is the beginning of Amicia's transformation into the version of her that is on the cover of the game. Up until now, she has just been a French girl who seems happy to be alive, but the next 30 minutes of the game will see her become something much more dangerous. A big sister, with a dirtier face and a cooler outfit. A mama bear whose cub you better not come anywhere near. Step 1 of this change is holding Hugo's hand to let him know he's not the only one scared of the bad men we have to sneak past. Step 2 is the part where Mom gets killed, and we are all alone, hunted in an unforgiving world with exactly one old lady's door open to us. Step 3, right after having changed outfits to signal the completion of the transformation, is what follows.
I shouldn't have shouted. Please listen to me.
No, leave me alone.
I'm sorry. No! Monsters! Leave him alone!
So that's where you were.
No! Wait, we just want to leave.
You will leave, yes.
I didn't want to.
Amicia! Amicia!
Hugo! I'm coming!
After this threshold is crossed, all the pieces of Amicia's very complicated character are in place, and all bets are off. She has become something utterly different, and there is no turning back. Her innocence has been lost. Hugo's, however, remains intact for now. Any more changes in Amicia's character beyond this point will be gradual. The path has been chosen, and the only question that remains is how quickly she will travel along it. The player has also been transformed by this turning point. Armed with a sling to fight back with asymmetrically, like David against the Goliath, we are no longer just running and hiding. In a sense, this is where the game really starts. We have been given a weapon and a drive to protect and avenge. No other tools or motivation will be necessary. We make this choice to kill, alongside Amicia, and we are affected by its consequences in a similar way. The game, or in another interpretation, the world, has not given us a choice. We have been dropped in as an innocent civilian, but at this point we cannot choose to let these thugs capture Hugo and kill Amicia any more than she can. The synchrony between the narrative's guidance through this sort of change and what the game asks you to do is very impressive. It may seem like a small thing, but I think holding a child's hand for the majority of the experience is actually one of this game's most defining features. I already mentioned how being a civilian is unusual, but being a mom is too. Of course, you aren't a mom, you're a big sister, but 10 years is a pretty big age gap, and we are unfortunately all too familiar with how broken families in our modern world can lay all the responsibilities of parenthood on the oldest sibling. Amicia has to do this, has to become a mom, in about 30 minutes, as I've said, which ingeniously puts the player there too, regardless of who they are. I am the youngest child from a nuclear family with basically no childcare experience, and this game made me understand, better than I ever had before, what motherhood, or just parenthood, might be like. In my opinion, playable characters are the ultimate pinnacle of representation in media. The motive of action present even in just walking around links player and character more deeply than film ever could. To act is to be, and watching someone is nowhere near as impactful as having to be someone. Of course, we have been traditionally overloaded with white, male, unattached heroes. Lately, strong, independent female characters have been slotted into more or less the same role. In many cases, the choice of gender has little effect on the story, and is even left to the player to decide. Though Assassin's Creed Odyssey was definitely written for Cassandra to be the main character, and the male option was kind of shoehorned in, but let's not go there. Aloy is a better example of a character who could not be male. The mother-daughter themes in that game are very strong. However, there are plenty of flat characters who take on the appearance of females without going into the complexities of what that really means. I'm not saying that flat characters shouldn't be allowed to exist. Obviously, not all games are going for narrative depth. But there are a lot of sad dads around who are really exploring what it means to be a man. There is an effort to reconcile their reckless, chaotic, flat-charactered past with some new responsibility, such as a child that, manly men as they are, they've never been able to handle. You can kill gods just fine, but figuring out how to interact with your son will bring you to your knees. This is the kind of complexity that I don't think we see much of on the female side of things. Perhaps women have not been the heroes for long enough for us to contemplate the complex consequences of that in the way we have done with these men. Obviously, Aloy exists, and I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting, but I don't think anything hits that mark better than A Plague Tale: Innocence.
Oh my god.
Are they all dead?
We can't carry on.
Amicia, we have to follow the aqueduct.
Blue and red, French fleur-de-lis and English lions, in a density and magnitude that seems historically unlikely. This view with broken trebuchets and other war machines under the looming ruins of a Roman aqueduct made me realize that this is just like all those other post-apocalyptic games. An empire has collapsed, and the divided nations are fighting over what scraps remain. It's just that this is an apocalypse that actually happened. I am reminded of this dialogue.
Hey, I'm in!
Yeah, we're going to use it to cross.
What?
Is he always like that? He hasn't seen much of the world. This isn't the best moment to start.
The player has seen basically as much of this world as Hugo has, and Amicia isn't far ahead. Like all of us, they have found themselves born into a peculiar world. A world in which people are doing what they have been doing since time prior to our comprehension. The iteration we are born into, though merely a reflection of the past, is so much more vivid to young eyes. One may ponder the vast tracts of history, but being inserted into a moment in time, to experience firsthand the variegated colors along the spectrum between delight and death, brings a different kind of perspective. As children, Hugo, Amicia, and the player experience the extant as though it is novel. We navigate crumbled structures that we never saw intact. We walk upon the corpses of men whom we have never seen alive. By the way, all the weapons and armor here and who is using which versions of each are correct for the 100 Years' War as far as I can tell, so that's nice. The only thing that bothered me in this game, historically speaking, is the single cooter Amicia wears on her right arm. I know the rest of her outfit probably doesn't make sense if you really get into it, but if you get nitpicky, you're sure to find plenty of other problems. It's just very obviously nonsensical that she would wear exactly one piece of armor, especially the elbow piece. The sling was, I believe, a very good choice for Amicia's weapon. She is a 15-year-old girl with little training, going up against military and paramilitary forces, often wearing full armor. She must use stealth and a weapon like this to fight them asymmetrically. Knowing that helmetless enemies are vulnerable to rocks from the sling is a very cool example of diegetically giving information to the player. The usage of light and fire to fight rats and seeing mud that will slow you down so that you can avoid it are nice touches as well. The remaining length of a stick will tell you how much more time it will burn for. Many of these mechanics are heavily tutorialized, but only once. If you forget about them, well, you get to learn them again the hard way. One of the easiest mistakes for a developer to make is to overdo it on the last boss. They've almost done that here, and I can see how someone struggling with this fight could get real sick of it, but I've seen a lot worse. Looking at you, Remnant from the Ashes. Vitalis' white rats don't care about light, which leads to a very cool rat battle where you extinguish fires to allow Hugo's rats to advance. Then you dodge rat attacks while leaving the center clear for Hugo to send in a swarm. Cracking this asshole's face with the sling is immensely satisfying, and dying a few times just meant I got to do it more.
Hugo! Calm down. It's over.
Hugo is, well, we've asked him to become a monster, haven't we? to accept the evil within him in order to defeat a greater one without. It's a good thing he has a really awesome big sister who isn't going anywhere.